How's it going, everybody? I'm Ryan. He's Abby. We are the Expansion Bros, ready to get into our season prediction episode. And speaking of predictions, it is a Sunday as we record this. The Bills play on Sunday Night Football, so let's get this thing started right away. Abby, Bills game prediction. They play the Ravens. Are they going to win?
I actually do a pick'ems with my cousins and stuff, and I have picked the Bills to win this game.
All right, you guys heard it here. It's not a Demko guarantee, but he did pick the Bills to win. So shout out Bills Mafia if you guys are listening. Welcome aboard. We're going to have you covered
Seahawks.
For what you're going to see this season from the Sabres as well as the Canucks, both teams with lofty hopes and goals. Before we dive into the hockey projections, there has been hockey played. So preseason is going well, for at least for the Sabres. They're unbeaten. Things are looking great. I mean, the team really is gelling and playing the way you'd like them to. That fourth line is looking really, really good. And then now that half the team is over in Europe, we're still playing games here stateside. And Noah Ostlund is probably the guy I'd give a shout out to that's looking really good now that he's staying with the team. And he's playing tremendously well. So Sabres, so far so good in the preseason. How are the Canucks doing? I'm not staying up late for preseason games. Sorry.
More than fair. The Canucks are doing okay. They're 2-2. They've played both the Kraken and the Flames twice, beat them once, lost once to each. I'll say just some highlights. The guy I mispronounced our prospect's name last episode. It's Vilmar Ulriksson, but I was correct in shouting out that he's playing well because he played so well that he's been signed to an ELC. Definitely not going to make the team, but I think that's just a good vote of confidence for the kid from the team. So that's always nice to see. He's a 6'6" big guy, so that's again a little different body type than we're used to on the Canucks. So again, that could be a really nice bottom six guy for us in the future. Additionally, I think a couple of the young guys are looking great. Both Atu Ratu, I think, has the best chance to make this team. He's been very good on the draw, very good defensively, and he scored a couple goals, so he has just looked excellent. And I know with Tocchet, it's very hard to impress him, but someone with the proper defensive prowess from the very beginning, like Ratu, is one of the people who can impress him and do well. Speaking of, Lekker has also looked very good, but I would say he has a smaller chance of making it to the team because Ratu could fit in on the third or fourth line, but if you're bringing Lekker onto the team, I feel like it has to be on the wing with Pettersson or perhaps on the second line with Miller and Besser, but I think we can talk about that a little bit more later. Overall, all the new additions also looked good. Sprong, DeBrusque on forward, they looked great. Sprong with speed and that late goal to tie the game looked great. And some of the old vets who we've had around as well, Max Sasson, he's looked good, and I think he has a chance to make the team. I would lean towards not, but just seeing these vets who have been around, sometimes you think like, oh God, these guys don't have any potential. Why are we keeping them around, right? But you get a reminder, right? These are the kind of guys you call up throughout the season if there's injuries. These are the guys who are, your 13th, 14th, 15th forward who can end up making a difference. So when you have good depth there and players playing well, that's always very encouraging to see. And especially, playoffs are going to take a pull. Injuries are going to happen. You want to have players like this available. I'll also throw in another player who maybe I didn't see so high on, the Belarusian goaltender, Nikita Tolopilo. He looks pretty good. Nothing spectacular, but he's looked a lot more solid, and maybe he's kind of coming into his own as he's getting a little older. And lastly, I would like to point out that Tyler Myers scored a wraparound goal, and I'm just going to let that sit there.
Hey, he's got the reach to do it. Like, come on. If there's anybody that's going to do it, it's like him and Tage Thompson. Obviously, he's not got the hands of Tage Thompson, but to your point about Lekker potentially not making the team because Ratu can play, anywhere in the bottom six, whereas Lekker you'd like to have a top six role. You guys also have Daniel Sprong, who's notoriously like what you envision as I don't want a sniper in the bottom six. Right? Because he can shift into the top six with injuries, but you just lose so much on your own end with a guy like Daniel Sprong. He's got the offense, so hopefully Lekker can round out his game and then potentially take over Daniel Sprong's spot next year. Could be a opportunity for him there. I mean, you'd like to see him get more minutes. Obviously, it's Lekker one of your more highly touted prospects at this point, but it's good to hear things that are going well. Happy to see guys get contracts for good performances, and we're rooting for everybody. I hope everybody does well and gets paid. Unless you're Toronto, then I hope you don't do well. So
no, then I hope you all just bust, and then they just like run out of players, and they have to sign people to over. Like I hope they sign like Yanni Hakanpää to a new extension of like just 10 by 10.
That
They
would
break
be
the CBA, 10-year extension, $10 million for their bottom pairing defenseman.
all right. Well, enough Schadenfreude for one segment. That's what's happening. What's happening later this week is a Sabres regular season game. They have
Ooh.
a back-to-back matchup with the New Jersey Devils, the new look Devils too, now with Markstrom and a new head coach. Their old head coach, I don't know, Abby, where did their old head coach go? I forgot.
Yeah, I don't know. Probably some. Is he coach? He's even still coaching right now. I thought he was pretty old.
I think so. I think some team did pick him up. So
Yeah. It's just not. I don't know. I'm sure he's around.
for those unaware of the sarcasm in the joke, Lindy Ruff got fired last year as the head coach of the Devils and now has come to be the head coach of the Buffalo Sabres. So that's exciting. And what else is exciting is we're going to start right away with our bold takes. We're not going to start with some lukewarm stuff. We're not microwaving lasagna. No, we're cooking with gas right off the rip. Abby, hit me with it. What is your bold take for this season for the Vancouver Canucks?
This is the scorching hot take. Daniel Sprong will score 35 goals this season.
Yeah, I mean, you may give up 70 if he's playing enough time to get 35, but that would be awesome. He's a guy that's one of those analytical darlings that everyone's like, why do you love him? And like, because he scores, but obviously the defense isn't good, so I have to push the panic button there. But
yeah, again, it's a hot take because again, like the chances are like there's a lot of things that have to go right for it to happen. A, he has to find chemistry with Pettersson, or Miller. B, he has to Tocchet has to either has to get good enough defensively to where Tocchet is okay with it, or Tocchet has to abandon his general mindset of wanting his top 6 players to be defensively responsible. Again, both those are slim pickings. But if he finds that chemistry with one of the top 2 forwards or centers, sorry, talking about his analytics, he just puts up so many goals with third or fourth line ice time. I can't if he gets the right chemistry, he's gonna score 30 goals. He just is. He just has too much offensive talent, too good of a shot, too much offensive instincts, too much speed not to score 30 goals. With the right circumstances, Daniel Sprong is gonna go out of here and go to another team next year with a 6x6.
yeah, Daniel Sprong is everybody's NHL be a pro, right?
Yeah.
You just kind of, not saying he goal hangs, but you know what I'm talking about. You're not really playing defense too much. You're trying to break out on the rush immediately. You've got speed, you got hands, you got a shot. You don't put any of your attribute points into the defensive categories. You load up
awareness.
Yeah, exactly. You go wrist shot accuracy and skating speed. And really for that to happen, I mean, his career high is 21 goals. So we're talking this guy's blowing his career best.
Breakout year.
Like almost double. A 27-year-old breakout year would be awesome. I think partially where he could benefit is on the power play, right? That year he did get 21 goals. He had 6 on the power play. Maybe he gets a little bit more power play time. Maybe he gets in the top 6. I mean, you guys aren't necessarily the healthiest team in the league right now, so there's an avenue to the ice time in advantageous situations. And maybe if the goaltenders are still a question mark, no Demko, can Seelovs do it? Maybe you guys will need to score more, which means late in games in the last 10 minutes, he's playing top 6 minutes in those last 10.
Well, yeah, speaking of power play, I could totally see him being on that first unit, right? Because your locks for that are Quinn Hughes on the point, JT Miller, Brock Besser, and Elias Pettersson, right? Yes, you could do Hronik. Yes, you could do someone else in front of the net. But that kind of 5th spot, I think, is very open. And that's where someone like Daniel Sprong could be on the point with Hughes, or if you're scared of the defensive, maybe you put him either in front of the net as the bumper, but that's where Besser was doing well, or you could just put him on the half boards and have him ready, because Sprong can score from the half boards. Again, he has an absolutely lethal shot, so if there's a hole the goalie is showing, he can put the puck in the hole. So that sounded weird. But I could see a spot from on PP1 or as just the main option on the power play too. Either way, I think Sprong could benefit from that. And then again, ultimately, if he's going to hit 35 goals, he has to play on one of the top 2 lines. So those are the conditions, and that's how it can get done.
Yeah, and he can have a career best shooting percentage too. I mean, he did shoot 17.6% 1 year in Washington. They only played 42 games though, so he had 13 goals. But if he does he's got that kind of shot, right? He's capable of doing that for 40 games. You know, and I think on on an electric team like this, he's a bit more mature. You hope defensively
Yeah.
too. You know, he's got to be thinking, I'm tired of bouncing from team to team to team. I need to do what it takes. So I'd love to see it. That would be awesome. He's one of those guys that you always root for. Just would love to see him play a little bit better in his own zone.
Yeah.
All right. My bold take, and it centers around the newly named Buffalo Sabres captain. So a bit of news that happened. Dahlin was named captain, and then they also named Tuck, Cousins, Tage, and Samuelson as assistant captains or alternate
Are you
captains.
allowed to do that? Or is it like some of them are home, some of them are like, is that a rotating cast?
Yeah, it'll be a rotating thing. Lindy Ruff loves his rotating captains, so yeah. But this one centers around the main man whose letter will not change on a game-to-game basis. Rasmus Dahlin.
Before you go, I'll say that I think that's the right call as well. I know we haven't really talked about it. I think that Dahlin was the right call.
Oh yeah, it's been a no-brainer. I know there's part of the fan base that wants Tuck just because he's a Sabres guy. I feel like Tuck's one of those guys that I love the fact that he's got an A on his chest. But I think the C, I don't think that there's anybody I'd rather have with the main man, the main leader in the locker room, on the ice. I mean, he's given his all every single shift since he's been here, and I think nobody wants success more than Rasmus Dahlin here in Buffalo. I mean, even Tuck.
Yeah.
You know, he's been here since he was 18, Rasmus Dahlin has, and he's given his heart on every play. He's had lows, and he's had some highs, and I think this season he's going to have his highest high. I think he's taking home some hardware this year, Abby.
Whoa!
I think Rasmus Dahlin wins the Norris Trophy this year.
Wow, that is a hot take.
I mean, listen, he is the one Sabres player, I think, besides, I think Lindy Ruff could win the Jack Adams if everything goes perfectly this season, right? I think Dahlin is the only Sabre capable of taking home hardware. Yes, maybe Tage can get the Rocket Richard. I don't see anybody on this team really getting the Art Ross. I think Dahlin has that upside to be 80, maybe 90 points, 20 goals, and the Sabres get back to the playoffs as a maybe divisional spot, not even wild card. I think he's in that conversation. He's been in the conversation when they missed by 1 point. Now, yes, he was behind guys like Adam Fox and Cale Makar, but I think he's been in the conversation in the past.
Yeah.
He's still got that talent. He's going to have a better offensive team and better talent and better structure. I think it's doable.
I'll throw one back at you, actually. You could see Yuri Kulik potentially for the Calder.
That's true. I don't think he's gonna get the ice time to do it, but I think if he makes the roster out of camp, which, I mean, listen, we have 5 days until we figure out what the opening night roster and lines look like. I think if he does, he absolutely could. He's a guy that's capable of putting up 25, 30 goals in his rookie season. But if it's a bold take, it's not the we're not going for the 0.5% here. We're going for less than 10% chance. So
no, I think there's a couple things that work both for and against this hot take. I think Dahlin is absolutely, as I said, seen as an elite defenseman. Everybody, when you think of Dahlin, it's not like, this defenseman where you're like, oh, he's on their top pairing, but is he really top pairing? There's no doubt Dahlin is an elite defenseman in this league, one of the best defensemen in this league, and he definitely has the skill capable of being in the Norris conversation. Now, the one thing working against Dahlin is voter fatigue for Makar is going to be lower than it was last year. Because in my opinion, Cale Makar is pretty much every year going to be the best defenseman in the league. You could debate whether it was Hughes or Makar last year, but I definitely think voter fatigue helped Hughes make sure he won that Norris last year. So that's going to be there a lot less this year, so that could work to Dahlin's disadvantage. Then again, right, Hughes is also now up in those conversations, so Hughes just having won last year will also have said voter fatigue. So it goes both ways, where now you have more of a threat of Makar winning it, but less of a threat of Hughes winning it. And Dahlin, again, being a fresh face, it's just people also like to vote for something new now, right? Because sometimes, as much as people used to like voting for Bergeron over and over and over again for Selke, or Kopitar over and over again for Selke, I think people like to change it up now. So I think that's to Dahlin's advantage and his skills to his advantage. And I think, again, with this kind of new vision under Lindy Ruff's kind of idea of this team, Dahlin could succeed as the offense kind of increases, and as Dahlin's probably defensive responsibility, already as a top pairing defenseman, he has to handle the hardest matchups and all that, but as his defense maybe gets more showcased and more eyes are on him, that could lead to Norris voting, kind of how Hughes started getting more eyes on him this year for his defensive play. So it's definitely a hot take. I definitely think it's unlikely, but I think it's a good take. It's a good hot take, and it could definitely happen. So I like it.
Yeah, it's one of those things you just kind of expect Makar to do it, right? And like you mentioned, voter fatigue. But I think if there's, like you mentioned, the shiny new object, if Dahlin is up there, right? Last year, Makar had 21 goals and 90 points to Quinn Hughes' 17 goals and 92 points. But the Canucks lit the league on fire. I think the Sabres play well, potentially at a 100-point pace, and Dahlin is in that 90-point conversation with almost 20 goals. I mean, he's the kind of guy that could put up 25, like we've seen him do in the past. I like you said, I think it's going to take a special kind of season from somebody to say that the Norris Trophy is not about who really is the best defenseman. It's the best performing defenseman that season / most points, right? So I think we can all agree that Makar is the best player at the defensive position. But it's one of those things, you can make a case for Rasmus Dahlin, and, you know, people like Buffalo. Nobody dislikes Buffalo, so I think we'll sway some of the voters that way too, because I think if there's any, like, voters or fans out there that are like, good, I'm glad Buffalo's suffering so much, I'm like, I just want to meet that person. I want to sit down and be like, who hurt you? What did we do, man?
I don't think you've upset anyone by beating them in the playoffs anytime recently, so I think you'll be okay.
Yeah, I don't think we have any rivals, so.
Yeah.
But that is our hot take. We're going to cool things down here for a moment. Let's talk about our pump the brakes take. Now, listen, we always try to give you the well-rounded, well-balanced takes here. That's why it's not just a Sabres podcast by me or just a Canucks podcast by Abhi. We're here to counteract the hopium, the copium, the tinted glasses. So we're each going to pump the brakes on our own team here. And let's see, are we being too pessimistic? So you went first with the bold take. I'll start with the pump the brakes take.
Sounds good.
I think UPL regresses this year.
Whoa.
I think he looks more like a top 20, 15 goaltender than a top 10 goaltender he was statistically last year. He was 9th in goals against average last year. I think that comes down. I think he looks more like a tandem goaltender, a 1A, 1B kind of goalie, rather than the guy that he was for the second half of last season. And the reason I say that is because I think it was a lot of, yes, he played great. He made some phenomenal saves. I don't want to take any of those away from him. But I feel like the structure and the scheme, we said that the Sabres went full Ralph Kruger for the last half of the season.
Yeah.
That kind of correlates directly to when UPL became a top 3 goaltender in the league. I think we're going to get back to seeing him be one of those, he's frustrating at times. He's good enough, maybe a guy that can win you a playoff series, but he's not going to be one of those top 10 goaltenders, top 5, like he was looked at last year.
Yeah, I think that's a good pump the brakes take. I didn't think of that. UPL is one of the people I don't know if I expected him to be like top 3 for him like he was at the end of last year, but I certainly kind of figured he'd stay, kind of that top 10 range, top 12. But it's interesting that you see so much regression for him, because I also think about what a top 15 goalie versus a top 20 goalie. It's almost that mentality where if you're a top 15 goalie, right, you're an above average goalie. But you're here top 20, even though it's just a couple places down, now you're a below league average starter, right? So it's interesting that you say top 15 to top 20. So and I'll ask for clarification then. Do you think UPL will be a below average starter next year?
That's a tough one, because below average, right? He'll be mid average, right? Like
he's number 16, right in the middle.
I'm looking at some of the names though that were in that range last year. Guys like Joel Hofer, Charlie Lindgren, Logan Thompson, Stuart Skinner. That kind of range of goalies where they're good. You don't love them, but they're still pretty good, right? Ottinger, obviously a statistical anomaly last year from what he's used to being. But you look at the top 10 goalies, right? We're talking Kochetkov, who was amazing. Bobrovsky, Hellebuck, Demko. Even Joey Decord had a great season. Cam Talbot, Jeremy Swayman, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, Linus Ullmark, Igor Shesterkin. Yeah, right? Those are the top 10, 11 guys that I just mentioned.
Yeah.
Anthony Stolarz, he played 27 games it was very good in those 27 games. I think he'll be more in that Carter Hart range, how he was playing last
I
year.
would hope he's not in any Carter Hart range. Hey,
Yeah, I
hey,
mean,
hey.
he's a good person, so we can at least say that about UPL. But like
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
mentioned, Hofer, Lindgren, Thompson, Skinner, I feel like that's a good bucket of guys, right? They're all
Mhm.
mid. You're not in love with them. They're your second or third goaltender on your fantasy team. You're not
Yeah.
loving trotting them out there, but they're doing a good job. And some games they go off, and some games you're like, buddy, come on, I need that one. So I think we're gonna see more him regress more towards a tandem level goaltender where he can be your 1A, he can play you 50 games, but he's not gonna be the guy like last year that plays 55, 60 games.
Okay. Yeah. You know what? I can see that. It's a I always will have a soft spot for goalies, right? My favorite player all time is Luongo. My favorite player now obviously is Demko, so I always have a soft spot for goalies and I always want them to succeed. I love a nice 2-1 game where both the goalies can have a nice 940 then the 960 save percentage, but yeah, I guess we'll see. That is a potential area for regression, and then if that is the case where your goaltending uh goes away, you have to see, like you said, kind of what you talked about with a potential Canucks issue if Demko can't get healthy or if Seelovs isn't cutting it, where you're going to need to compensate with some offense.
And I think that's exactly what's going to happen. I know that Lindy Ruff is a pretty good defensive coach, but I'm just trying to pull it up really quickly here. Yeah, the Sabres were
Mhm.
11th in goals against per game last year, and that really ratcheted up in the second half of the season. I think
Mhm.
they'll be thereabouts. I think they'll be in the Nashville, Washington, Colorado range with +3 goals against per game. You guys were at
Mhm.
2.7, just for reference, at fifth. So
Mhm.
I'm not saying Luukkonen's going to fall off and we're going to be 30th in goals against either. This is just pump the
Yeah.
brakes. Don't let the hype train roll away.
Mhm.
Calm down. Come back to earth. And I just think I've never been huge on UPL. I've never thought he could be a Demko, a Hellebuck.
Mm.
I've always thought that Luukkonen could be a solid tandem goalie, and I think he is going to be that. But enough about Luukkonen. We've talked a lot about UPL. You got one
Yeah.
more thing to say there? Because you just
I was gonna say I think I think I could fact check you on that. Maybe it would have been 5-6 years ago, but I feel like I heard a little bit of Lucan and Demko comparison. So I'm gonna leave it out because I don't have the best of memory, but I double
I
check
would.
that.
I don't think I'd talk about Luukkonen and
I
Demko. I was never a big Luukkonen
I
guy.
think I remember a couple comments many years ago.
Yeah, we're talking about prospects. Like you never know what they're going to
Okay.
end up being. Anyway, what's yours? Let's
Okay.
hear the Canucks pump the brakes take there, mister.
Okay, okay. So again, training camp, very, very exciting. I think many fans have been excited to see what the young guys can do, especially like Mackie. But this is where I am gonna say pump the brakes on Lek Mackie making the team out of camp. I don't even think he's going to make the team this year. Maybe he's an injury call up, but I think, again, we have to remember who the coach of the Canucks is. It's Rick Tocchet. He likes defensively responsible players, and as we just talked about, Daniel Sprong is probably going to be on this team. I don't think Rick Tocchet has the capacity to have two uh, wingers with poor defensive responsibility on this team, and he certainly isn't going to play Lek Mackie in the bottom six if he does for long at all. So I think Mackie will not be playing for the Canucks this year after the preseason. That is my pump the brakes take.
That's an interesting one too. Okay? You think he's going to play none at all this season?
I don't think he's going to play at all. I think
Wow.
they'll send
Okay.
him to
Even with
the AHL or
injuries?
loan him somewhere. I think people like Sasson are going to be called up first because what they'll do is they'll move up. If Sprong plays on the third line of Garland, whoever, right? Dakota Joshua, these are the players who will get moved up. Or even as we saw last year, Phil DiGiuseppe, a lot of these depth guys get moved up. Hoglander, a lot of these guys get moved up in the lineup. And I think he's going to want sound defensive players like Ratu, like Sasson, like DiGiuseppe, like Nils Oman. These are the kind of players he's going to want to put into the lineup. So I don't think Mackie would even be an injury call-up just because they wouldn't be filling him in for injuries in the top six. They'd be pulling up depth from the third line and then filling in the bottom six.
And the streak of Canucks draft picks not playing games continues.
All right.
I mean, honestly, I like it, right? We can easily get carried away with prospects before they've played NHL games, right? We see them on Chell 25.
Medium elite.
Right, medium elite player. We're in the year 2030, and they're a 90 overall, putting up 92 points, and that kind of clouds our perspective. And we need to ground ourselves in reality that all these Sabres prospects, they're so good, there's so many so valuable, and all these goal scorers for the Canucks, and all these really talented players in the pipeline, and just like, guys, we gotta pump the brakes. Like these they're young too. Like most NHLers don't make it before their 21st birthday. It's just like they don't come in and immediately have success. That is more the exception rather than the rule. So I think that's one of those.
Absolutely.
And it's a decent reminder for Sabres fans. Like if Kulich doesn't make the roster out of camp, right? We can pump the brakes on his rise to superstardom. And we can also acknowledge the fact that his career's not over. These aren't make it or break it years for these kids. And I think it's a perfect point about Lekaramaki. Let him round out his game in Abbotsford, right? Is that still your affiliate?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm so glad I pulled that one out.
Well done.
But yeah, let him grow his defensive game. And that's kind of what the Sabres are doing with Kulich. Like that's one of the big talking points is winning the puck battles in the corner, playing smart defensive hockey, making the responsible play rather than the flashy play. And I think that's the kind of thing that once they get that and you call him up, he could have a 30-goal season in his rookie season easily. And I'm talking, I guess, about both of them.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think both Lekaramaki and Kulich, then, if they don't make it this year, can absolutely be Calder candidates next year, who have real big breakout seasons. But yeah, I don't want to speak for Kulich just because I haven't been watching him as closely as I have Lekaramaki, but I think it could even be of a good benefit to have him in the AHL again, just getting used to. It's a little different than perhaps a OHL player, just because he is used to playing against men, but also getting used to North American ice and all that as well. It may be good for him to spend a year in the AHL and then come up next year, be ready for the top six, be defensively responsible, be all trained in what he needs to know, and then he can continue to learn from Rick Tocchet next year. But at least having a better hold of the basics so he can maintain his spot in the top six and then learn on the fly as well while contributing offensively.
All right, so we have been depressing enough. We've pumped the brakes enough. We're ready to take off. Abhi,
back up the accelerator.
What is your season mantra? What are we going to be repeating every week on this podcast? What is going to be ringing through the streets of Vancouver this season?
That's my answer.
Just a simple
Just a simple
HMM.
Cautiously optimistic.
Okay.
I think we're going to go through a lot this season. I have a feeling that we're not done with the injury bug. Vancouver, again, has some of the longest travel. I think the longest travel in the league, and that can take its toll. You've seen players like Chris Tanev, who used to get injured every single year, be fairly healthy since they left Vancouver. I think, and maybe that's part of our strength and conditioning coaches as well. But Vancouver tends to pile up the injuries. So I think we're going to go through a lot of injuries, and we're still going to do decent. But every week it's going to be, it feels like we're one or two things away from falling out of contention, or we're one or two things away from getting to the top. Very, very cautiously optimistic, but nervous.
I could see that. And I shouldn't have expected anything less coming from you, Mr. Oh, we're in first for the President's Trophy, but we could still miss the playoffs. Yeah. But I think it's a really good take. All jokes aside, I think it's one of those, it's easy to think of development as a linear curve, right? Just straight line. Yeah. Like, boom, we just get this much better every year until we win the cup and then we're done, right? It's that easy. If it was that easy, everybody would do it. I think this season's going to be one of those, you're a battle-tested team, gut it out, get to the playoffs in a spot, don't shoot yourselves in the foot. Don't squeak in as wild card number 2 and then right?
take on one seed,
Yeah, exactly. But, get it done and then focus on the postseason. I think if all of a sudden come Thanksgiving and Christmas, American Thanksgiving and then Christmas, if you guys are still hovering or potentially hovering around that wild card spot, that's when the becomes less cautiously optimistic and cautiously pessimistic, right? But I think that, you guys have been there, you've done that, you're battle tested. I think having stability for the first time as far as coaching staff, a good coach,
Yeah.
stability with a good coach.
Yes.
Stability with a bad coach just for the sake of stability is a bad thing to do. Just we can all
Absolutely.
agree on that. And then stability in core of roster, right? You're filling in pieces, seeing where maybe you fell short last season, right? One of the things that Buffalo Bills general manager Brandon Beane says is your last loss of the season shows you your biggest weaknesses. And I think that kind of goes true, in hockey, right? We'll talk about the last series, right? Because in the NFL, it's one game. Here, it's a series. But, reassess what went wrong against Edmonton and then fill those holes and then just take another run at it. And obviously, it's not as simple as just doing it every year. I mean, we've seen the Eastern Conference basically do it every year. But I think once you get there, once you figure it out, it does become a little easier. And like you said, injuries can happen. Anything, you never know what's going to happen. So I think cautious optimism is probably good for Vancouver because it's really easy to get on that runaway train of, oh, we gave Edmonton a really good series. We were that close. We were like one goal away from forcing overtime, and they were the Western Conference champions, and da-da-da-da-da. And we added all these players, and Lekkeramaki's great, and Daniel Sprong scores a bunch of goals, and Canucks win the Super Bowl, right?
Canucks going to Super Bowl.
Yeah, pretty much. But no, I think cautious optimism is probably the right mantra, and I think it's a mature one too for a maturing hockey team.
Yeah, and I think Canucks fans and hopefully management, even though it's a different management team, have learned from the Canucks bubble run where they made it to that second round, almost to the conference finals, very eerily similar to what happened this year. And they decided, okay, let's sign Jay Beagle and Antoine Roussel to 4-year deals. We've seen them make much smarter moves this year, much less riskier moves, and more locking down younger talent like Hronik, for example, Dakota Joshua. It's been much more cautious, right? Not just throwing money at bottom sixers because that's what you need to win. It's been more calculated moves, and I think that's exactly what it speaks to: cautious optimism. Yes, we want to load up. Yes, we want to make sure we are giving ourselves a good chance to go deep in these playoffs, but we also want to make sure that we're not screwing ourselves to the future in case that was some PDO miracle, or that was some sort of just some luck or whatever reason. If we have a horrible PDO this year, we're the opposite, if we're a 90 PDO this year or something, right? For any reason, if we need to shift gears or retool, God forbid, or anything like that, we have the flexibility this year. And I think that should also be the expectation, that there will be some regression. But like you said, we know our purpose this year. Last year, we were just trying to do something positive, right? Make the playoffs. Now we've been there. Now we're battle tested. Now we know that even if we get there as the 3 seed in the Pacific, we know what we have to do. We know where the mindset is, and we know that we ran out of gas against the Edmonton Oilers, and we have to be prepared for that this year.
Yeah, and I think cautious, as an organization, is still good when you're taking swings. And they maybe learned from the Elias Lindholm trade. Obviously, I don't think you guys gave up too many assets that are going to set you back, but that trade didn't really help you guys. Lindholm wasn't an it factor come playoff time, really. I mean, you maybe would have liked.
He was good.
You would have liked more out of him, is what I mean. Like, right? But what I'm trying to say is they didn't see things start going wrong with the Lindholm trade and then go turn around and try and make a Gensel trade and double dip and give up all those assets, right? Like,
depends on the rumors you follow.
Well, I mean, they may have tried. They had those conversations, but at the end of the day, they didn't pull the trigger. They didn't give up enough for Pittsburgh to accept it, right? So they were offering what they're comfortable with. And this is something that Sabres fans and I, we've had plenty of conversations about. Why isn't Kevin Adams making trades? Well, that doesn't mean he's not trying. And, at some point, if you're going to negotiate with me for an iPhone, and you have a perception of what an iPhone is worth, right? Apple tells us that it's $1,000. If I start asking you for $1,200, $1,300, $1,400, you're not going to be like, okay, like, I'm not really willing to go over the $1,000 that I value this iPhone at. So I think that's kind of that smart, cautious, calculated, pragmatic leadership that I think will bode well, because you don't want to just be there once, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
You want to win the cup.
Been there, done that.
Obviously, win the cup and whatever happens next, who cares? Because you won it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you don't also want to be like, okay, we made it to the second round. Let's go all in. Getting to the second round doesn't mean go all in. That means you still have 2 rounds to win, 3 rounds before you win the cup, right?
Yeah.
So there's still holes on the roster that need to be filled, and I think it's been a very smart approach from Vancouver. So I'm going to try and bring the optimism because, I'm a naturally optimistic guy, and I like to bring the hype. But I think this season, if we try to temper expectations a bit, I am expecting playoffs. I'm not expecting President's Trophy, 1 seed in the West. Not expecting Pacific Division champions either. We'll get to that later when we get to the league-wide segment here. But I think that's a very, very astute mantra for you this year.
Thank you.
Let's talk about Buffalo now, shall we? As you guys can probably already tell by my voice, it's not going to be and cautious optimism. The season mantra I'm starting with the Buffalo Sabres this year is #the return. We will return. Lindy Ruff returns to Buffalo. Tage Thompson returns to scoring 40+. Tuck returns to a point per game. Cousins returns to 20+ goals. Quinn returns to the lineup. And the Sabres return to the playoffs, baby. I think it's all about returning to form here over in Buffalo this year. I think we get back to the playoffs. I think these guys go back to playing much better hockey. I think they're going to be better conditioned. I think they're going to be better coached. Thank you, Don Granato, but I think that this is the right move. Lindy's back. He's returning to Buffalo, where he really made his career famous, both as a player and as a coach. And I think I just think that this is the year the Sabres return to the playoffs. I think if all this goes well, right? And you can pick and choose. Does Tage return to 40? Okay, maybe not. Well, if Tuck returns to a point per game, then I think the Sabres still return to the playoffs. Cousins gets to 20 goals. Quinn stays in the lineup, right? Like, it's we're not putting our hopes on one player. We're not putting all of our eggs in one basket. There is a lot of, I think, statistical regression coming for a lot of these guys. I think they'll play better hockey. I think they'll get more expected goals. They'll get more high danger chances. They'll take the body. They'll stand up for each other, which something I really loved against the Pittsburgh Penguins in preseason is how they stood up for each other and played as a team. I think the heart and soul is returning to the Buffalo Sabres.
You love to hear that. And I love that idea, the return. As you said, right, you've got your coach returning. You've got a lot of players who want to return to form, but your big key for this is that you don't need everything to go right. You just need enough to go right. And I think that's a great position to be in, because that's even for the best of teams, right? Like if McDavid goes down for the Edmonton Oilers, are they still going to make it? How long is he out for? All these things, right? Yes, they're still a good team, but they'll probably still make it. So they don't need everything to go right, for example, for them. And there, again, they just went to the Stanley Cup Finals. Same thing for the Panthers. So if you're in that position where you don't need everything to go right, then things are looking good for you, right? For example, if for the Sharks to make the playoffs, oh my gosh, you'd need your goaltender to stand on his head. You'd need Macklin Celebrini to have a breakout season and literally bring everyone up with him. You'd need every single prospect to develop, and then maybe you're a wild card too. Now, for the Sabres, right, if everything goes right, they could be a divisional playoff team. That's what I see. And again, maybe we'll talk more about that later. But the Sabres don't need everything to go right to go to the playoffs. And once they're in the playoffs, it's house money. There's no expectations. There's no pressure. It's like the Canucks this year. Yes, you wanted them to win because they were the higher seed and all that, but we didn't even have expectations of playoffs in the beginning of the season. Same thing for the Sabres here. Yes, there's optimism, but there's always been optimism, and they've been let down every time. So if they can actually make the dance this time, I know the city of Buffalo is going to rally behind them, and it will be not just the return of the coach, not just the return of players to form, not just the return of this passion, but also the return of the fans, the return of the identity of the Buffalo Sabres. So I absolutely love this tagline from you.
I love it. It's stealing from the D-Rose, hashtag their return. I mean, I had to, right? I was thinking about it today as we were gearing up for this segment, and I'm like, well, everything just screams to getting back to where the Sabres, a historically successful and proud franchise, getting them back to where they should be, right? Before Pagula bought the team, the Sabres were like top 5, top 3 in points percentage all time, right? As a franchise, like That's what we used to be. For the last 13 years, we've been, I think we've got like the third fewest wins out of all active NHL teams. Hello, Vegas and Seattle just joined the league, and Vegas, well, might pass us if everything goes poorly again. But I think it's a return to form and return to Buffalo Sabres hockey. I think it's going to be a great season. I'm so excited for this season, and it's just a return. It's just, there's so much, obviously, like you mentioned, we're returning a lot of stuff. Tage back to form, but we don't need it all to go perfectly. But I think, it's a perfect little segue into, let's talk about the rest of the league, our playoff predictions, our division winners, and finally, let's talk about the Stanley Cup, because that's obviously the ultimate goal, and we all want to win the cup. Obviously, I'd love for the Sabres to win the cup. Like you mentioned, it's house money at this point if we just return to the playoffs.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the teams that could win the division, or, well, are likely to win the division in our eyes, right? The Sabres could. They're probably not likely. So, Abhi, Atlantic, Metro, Pacific, Central. Let me hear it.
Okay. So from the Pacific, right now as the division winner, I have the Edmonton Oilers. Obviously, you could see the Canucks and the Golden Knights win it as well. But I think at this point in time, the Oilers just look very, very solid. As long as McDavid and Draisaitl stay healthy, they'll be okay. And I think ultimately we will see some regression from the Canucks due to injuries. And Vegas is often very streaky as well. And I don't believe in any other team in the Pacific Division to even compete for that spot. So I think I'll lock in the Edmonton Oilers for the Pacific Division. For the Central, it's a little more up for grabs. Both the Avalanche and the Dallas Stars are interesting teams, but I'm going to go out on a whim here. And I'm going to pick a team that just loaded up in free agency, and I'm going to go with the Nashville Predators. The Steven Stamkos-led Nashville Predators, still with Roman Josi on the back end, all their new additions, UC Saros. They really gave the Canucks hell in that playoff series. And I think I see a very, very good team there. Yes, they lost some depth like Kiefer Sherwood, but again, they got this top-end talent now.
And that's going to push, speaking of depth, sorry to cut you off, like that's going to push some players down to make up for that lack of depth, if you will, right? Sometimes they're second line players, now a third line player.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, especially with Saros, who already dragged some okay Nashville teams to the playoffs, I think with these new key additions around their team, I think they can win the division. And I know it's been a while for them. I remember they went to the Stanley Cup in 2018, was it, against the Penguins?
No, it was I think maybe 2017.
17. Okay. Yeah, it's been a while, but they've always been kind of this. I feel like it's called the Minnesota zone. Somewhere between one spot out of the playoffs to the third divisional team / wildcard, kind of that mediocre thing. They're always going to get bounced in the first, if not the first, then guaranteed the second round, usually the first, or just miss the playoffs. So I think this is their opportunity to finally win the division, distinguish themselves, and maybe do some damage this year.
I like those picks. I love the Nashville one because it's bold. It definitely plays into the who just got the shiniest object, right? Who bought the newest car? It's clearly the Nashville Predators because they just went out and loaded up. But I will say on the Oilers pick before we move over, would you like to hear my Western Conference before we move over to the East, or?
Oh, sure.
Okay. To your point, though, on the Oilers, spoiler alert, I also have the Oilers. I think the one thing that we are overlooking is the Jeff Skinner effect. They signed Jeff Skinner. My guy's never made the playoffs. What is stronger, McDavid and Draisaitl or the Jeff Skinner effect?
Skinner curse.
Yeah, which one's gonna drag him down more? And then sticking with curses, I think the Avalanche win the Central. Because they have former Sabre Casey Middlestat, and we're not allowed to have nice things over here. So I just think they're a well-rounded team. I think they're deep. I think last year was just a get healthy season. This season, I mean, they still put up 107. Good Lord. I think obviously Makar, McKinnon, and I think Middlestat's perfect for their second line, something that was kind of missing. So I think that a full season of Middlestat in Colorado, I think that he's really going to show people that he is a top 6 center. And I'm looking forward to it. Colorado's been in one of those teams where I've never really had anything against them. So I'd like to
Yeah,
root for both of well for them. I'd like to see the Canucks win, but it's almost better if you don't.
yeah,
For
I
your
agree.
sake, I think that's why you ran out of gas, like you mentioned last season.
Yeah, I think I went a little too hard. But to speak on the Colorado pick a little bit, my only concerns, and I think again, if I didn't pick Nashville, I probably would have gone with Colorado. The issues are, I think you still have Landeskog on IR. I assume he'll be back this year, but we don't know how his health is looking. You don't know what's going on with Valerie Nichushkin, and then of course their biggest question mark they've had, more so in the playoffs, but I think it also could be an issue in the regular season. I remember that year. Do you remember that year Georgiev was an All-Star? I don't know if this was last year or 2 years ago, and he had an 890 save percentage.
He was an all-star with 890.
Something like that. I remember it was looking at the stats and I was like, "What's a polar bear doing in Arlington, Texas, man?" Like, um, it just Georgiev and Anion don't inspire confidence in me, and in what could be a very competitive Central Division, I could see that working against um, the Avalanche, and that's why I think I have the Predators with that strong backstop of Saros ahead of the Avalanche in that slot.
Yeah, I think goaltending is obviously the one area you look at this team, you circle it, it's just the question mark. I really
Yeah.
do like the depth on the blue line, though. I mean, there's
It
some
looks
really
great.
high quality depth. I mean, obviously you got Makar and Tays, Girard
Yeah.
and Manson, and you've got Shillington, Brandstrom,
Shillington's great.
Dahan. I mean,
Yeah.
like you got three guys there that for two spots, even with an injury, I think they'll be fine. I
Yeah.
don't know much about Jacob McDonald. Don't know if he's really going to factor in as anything more than a seventh defenseman
Yeah.
archetype. But I mean, I really like the blue line they've got here, and I think that can help along with Casey Middlestat, giving that second line a bit of a boost. I think that could offset maybe some of the goaltending things, but I think it'll be interesting, right? Nashville, they loaded up. They've got the proven goaltender. Now they've got proven goal scorers, not in Tennessee, but in other states.
Yeah.
And we'll see just what happens there. Do they gel right away? Do they play the right way? Right? We look at this stuff on paper. I think it's a really exciting team. I think it's going to be a really fun season for the Central. It will be fun to revisit this later in the season too. We both have
Yes,
the
I agree.
Oilers, which I hope is wrong. I hope the Oilers don't win the Pacific. And we'll see
Yeah.
between us who's got the Central. Let's move over to my
Yep.
domain now
Yep.
and talk about the Eastern Conference. Well, I'll just start. We've
Yeah.
got the Atlantic and Metropolitan. I have the Toronto Maple Leafs winning the Atlantic and the Carolina Hurricanes winning the Metro. I think it's kind of by default for Toronto. I think Boston's taking a step back this year. I know they were 1 point behind Florida last year. I think they're going to take a step back. And I think Florida, after being to the Cup Finals back to back, this time winning it and saying goodbye to a lot of players that stuck around for one more run at it, I think they're going to have a slower start. I don't think they're going to have as tremendous of a season. I could still see them being a 100-point team, don't get me wrong. But I think Toronto, almost by default, because I didn't want to pick Tampa Bay, Detroit, Buffalo, Ottawa, or Montreal. And they were only 7-8 points behind them last season. The Hurricanes, I
Yeah.
really like their additions, right? I really like what they've done with that team. I think there's depth. They're always there, thereabouts. I think, goaltending stays healthy this year, and I think they're right there with the Rangers. The Metro is really a two-horse race to me, and I went with the Hurricanes because
Yeah.
I always think they do better in the regular season anyway.
Yeah. I also have the Toronto Maple Leafs for the exact same reasons. I think all the other teams that were on their level last year are going to see regression. I think Boston is going to face not having Allmark a lot more. And I think Swayman might crumble under the pressure of having to be the sole goalie instead of in a tandem. Same thing for Tampa Bay with Vasilevsky. I don't think he's healthy, and in fact, even if he is healthy, I think he's too injury prone. And we're going to see too much of Matt Tompkins and Jonas Johansson for them to win the division. So I think, and as much as I think the Sabres are going to ascend, maybe Detroit could ascend a little bit, maybe even the Islanders, I don't think they're going to ascend to the point where they can stop the machine right now. The regular season machine, I should say. Not so much a playoff machine, but the regular season machine that are the Toronto Maple Leafs. So I think that's probably the easiest selection out of all the divisions that we've even had to make. Toronto is the easiest to lock in. In the Central, like you said, it's a two-horse race. It's a choice between Carolina and New York, and I've been going back and forth in my head. And I think I was going to go towards Carolina, but for the sake of it, let's switch it up. I'm going to go with the New York Rangers. Now, I think Carolina is a good team, but like you mentioned, they often have goalie troubles. They do have two, I believe it's two good goalies now with Frederick Anderson and Kachetkov. But I don't know. There's something about them, They get great forward depth, good defensive core with Slavin and Pesci and Brent Burns, or sorry, not Pesci anymore. Slavin and Burns and Orlov, Jalen Chatfield, shout out Canucks legend. But I'm just worried that they used to have three. It used to be Ronta and Anderson and Kochetkov, or they always had three goalies, and two of them would get injured. This time I'm worried again. I don't know how much we know about Kochetkov's stamina. He is 25 years old, so it's more likely he's going to stay healthy. But Frederick Anderson hasn't been healthy for a full season. I don't know since when. So I'm just a little iffy there. It just scares me a little bit. Now again, any goalie can get injured, but honestly, looking at the Rangers, there's a reason again that we call it a two-horse race. They have an absolutely sick forward core with Panarin and Zibanejad and Trocheck and Kreider, and a bunch of young players too who can take a step like Lafreniere. There's still some players you don't know if they're going to get that much better, like Capo Caco, but you don't know, right? You've got the exciting Rempe even, right? You don't know how much better all these players are going to get. They have an exciting mix of veterans and youth, so they may have more upside than you'd think. And they look at their defensive core as well, very young. Outside of Trouba, they're all under 30, and even Trouba just at 30. It's a very young defensive core, and I know Lindgren's on IR right now, but a young defensive core that could potentially stay healthy throughout the year, and make a difference, right? Seeing positive progression from players like Keandre Miller and Braden Schneider as well. And then you look at Jonathan Quick. I know he's getting old, but he had an excellent season as the backup last year for the Rangers. So again, you wouldn't want him in for any extended periods of time. But I have a feeling that for when Shesterkin needs a break, or if there is any injury, I actually feel even more confident in Jonathan Quick than I do Kochetkov. Even though I know we talked about how good Kochetkov's numbers were last year, I wouldn't, much like UPL, I think sometimes young goalies can get hot at a certain time, and then you have to give them some time for regression as well and to see what they really are. And I still think Kochetkov can be a very good goalie in this league, but I think my gut's telling me, you know what, I want to go with the Rangers on this one.
That's fair, and I appreciate you switching up your pick just for the sake of diversity here in the conversation. I'm just, I'm surprised that you value 38-year-old Jonathan Quick as more reliable than 25 Kochetkov or 34 Anderson. Obviously, Shesterkin is the best out of the four, but
yes. No, I think I was surprised last year. Honestly, I was surprised that Quick did not look washed at all. And I think he can do it again this year. There's a couple of goalies who have continued to play well late into their career. Ryan Miller comes to mind. There's a couple other goalies that transitioned from starters to backups, and they really maintained themselves into their later years. Varlamov, Halak, a lot of these guys just continue. I know Halak didn't play very well with the Canucks, but he played well elsewhere. A lot of these guys just managed to flower, even Marc-Andre Fleury. A lot of these guys transition into tandem or backup roles, and they just succeed. So I honestly trust Quick quite a bit, despite his age. And I know that's definitely a hot take again. 38-year-old goalie, with all those miles, all those long playoff runs on his bones. But I think he's been spending most of the year last year relaxing behind Shesterkin. I think he'll do the same thing this year. And if he has to take over for 15, 20 games, I think they're sound enough defensively in front of him, and they're just going to straight up outscore their problems as well. So even if he's letting in 3 goals a game, I think they'll score 5 goals a game in return.
Yeah, I think it's one of those. There's just so much talent. There's so much depth on both teams that it's like we just
a coin flip.
Scroll back throughout history, like the years, and like, oh, it's Hurricanes this time out, more points than the rate. Last year was the Rangers. 21-22 was the Hurricanes. 2021 was, well, wait, that's the COVID year. 1920, they only played 70 games, and the Capitals were on top. But like, it just feels like for the last 3 or 4 years, it's been
recent history.
It's been but like 3 wins between them, right? No more than 6 points. And I think, obviously goaltending health and so much can change there. But just taking a look here, brought to you by FanDuel, not actually a sponsored segment, but I just wanted to compare how we see it compared to what the bettors, the sports bettors say. For the Atlantic, they've got Florida, and right behind them, they've got Toronto. After those 2 teams, there's a significant odds drop off before you get to Tampa Bay and then Boston. So that's their top 4.
Yeah.
Moving over to the Metropolitan Division, the sports bettors have a hot take for us, ladies and gentlemen. They've got the
Ooh.
New Jersey Devils as favorites to win the Metro,
Whoa.
followed by the Rangers and Hurricanes with tight odds. So basically what we're saying
Interesting.
here, a toss-up, but I did not see the Devils coming. For the
I did not
Pacific,
either.
they've
Wow.
got Edmonton as clear favorites, followed by Vegas and then Vancouver. And then in the Central, they have Colorado, Dallas is right there, and then Nashville is a little bit further away than either of those teams. And I think a lot of times it's because we've seen it before. We've seen Colorado and Dallas do it before. We've seen Edmonton do it before. I can't explain to you the Devils one. I guess they just thought that goaltending was that big of a weakness for them. I think the Devils took a step back in other areas. I know they got a better goaltender in Markstrom, but we'll see. I mean, that's an interesting one. Let's talk about our playoff teams now, because I know the Devils may or may not pop up in there. So, I mean, if Vegas is saying they're going to win the Metro, like, let's talk about it. Abby, let's stick to the Eastern Conference while we're on it. Who are your 8 playoff teams from the Eastern Conference?
Okay. Let's start here. So obviously we know 2 of them. We have Toronto and Carolina as division winners. Obviously, if they weren't part of my playoff predictions, you probably wouldn't be able to take me very seriously. Other teams I have are the Florida Panthers, and the Detroit Red Wings from the Atlantic, and the New York Islanders, Pittsburgh Penguins, and New York Rangers from the Metro. Now, if you're noticing, there's one team missing there. And that is because I'd like to remind everyone of my Demko guarantee. The Buffalo Sabres will make the playoffs this year.
I'm so happy I've convinced you.
If I had not made said guarantee last episode, perhaps I'd be leaning towards a team with devil horns to make that last spot. But due to the guarantee, New Jersey will have to take a backseat to the Buffalo Sabres. And I think we look at some of these teams, right? And it's just, you look at Toronto, Florida, Carolina, New York. These are just staple teams. They've made the playoffs. They're going to keep making the playoffs just because the teams are just so much better than everyone else, right? It's ultimately what ends up dividing these teams in the playoffs, right? Is a little bit of the randomness of the game, as well as, teams who are built differently make that acquisition difference. Ultimately, it's not going to stop these teams in the regular season with so many games. I just can't see any of these teams missing the playoffs. Looking at Detroit, they were very close to making it last year, and if they hadn't got the freaking garbage patches on their jerseys and all that bad voodoo, I think they probably would have made the playoffs last year. So, and it would have been a much more entertaining series than what the Caps put up last year. So, I think that one kind of says itself. I think they'll have the positive regression and make it happen. As far as Buffalo is concerned, I think Ryan can talk a lot more about that in his section, but we've talked just quite a bit about how they're going to be better this year under Lindy Ruff. And again, all the parallels I've drawn between the Canucks last year and the Sabres this year, I think this is their year to break out.
I hope you're right.
The return. And then the other 2 teams, the Islanders, I think are always slept on. Everybody kind of looks at them as boring, and they just somehow always make the playoffs. So I think that one was another one where they're an easy wildcard team that will get bounced in the first or second round, but they are a team that tends to make the dance. And then lastly, the Pittsburgh Penguins. Crosby is just an ageless wonder. They have everyone around him still. I know they missed the playoffs last year, but I think Carlson was pretty decent last year, and I think he can keep it up this year as well. And I think if you just have a couple things go your way, they can make the playoffs. I have this belief in them that they can make the playoffs, right? They just need the right goaltending, which they got for parts of the season last year. They just need everything to come together, because I think Crosby will hold up. I don't know how well a 38-year-old Malkin and a 37-year-old Letang will hold up, but I have a good feeling about this team. So I ended up going with my gut on this one, and picking the Penguins over the Devils.
Yeah, every once in a while you need that gut pick, right? And neither of us, before I had mentioned the Devils as well, sports bettors saying that they're probably the favorites to win the Metro. We didn't really look at them too highly. They went out and signed Sheldon Keefe to be their new head coach. So we'll see how that one goes now out of Toronto. I mean, again, we'll see what happens, but the Pittsburgh one is probably the one I would disagree with the most. You mentioned age. I'm not a huge fan of the way the roster is constructed, especially on the blue line. I don't
Hmm.
really love their goaltenders. Again, they're more of that meh category I was talking about earlier. But it's just age. How long can these guys keep playing at a high level? I mean, the average age of this team, like you've got Malkin and Crosby, 38 and 37. You got Brian Rust, who's
Yeah.
32. Ricard Raquel's 31. Kevin Hayes is 32. Lars Eller is 35. Noel Achari's 32. And that's just the forward core. You got Carlson at 34. Letang at 37. Graves 29. Pedersen 28. Okay, I'll give you that. But I just wonder if the age and the speed is going to be there for this team, because I think that's really in today's NHL, you really need speed. Now, guys like Crosby can, overcome that lack of elite speed with just being top 2 in literally every other category you could talk about. But I just that would be the one that probably sticks out to me as the least likely to happen.
Yeah, that's fair. Again, there's lots of holes there, like you said, age, roster construction, but that's why we have our gut checks.
Yeah, that's why you got to try every once in a while. You got to just say, like, I know this doesn't make sense, but
Yeah.
when does everything make sense, especially in hockey? So,
Yeah.
transitioning over to my list, did you have 4 from each division?
Yes.
All right. Well, I am gonna buck that trend because I've got 5 from one division. I have the Leafs, Lightning, Bruins, Panthers, and Sabres out of the Atlantic. And I have Rangers, Hurricanes, and Capitals to make it as the 3 metropolitan teams. And obviously, we've talked about the Leafs. I think Stolarz is a good get for them in goal. I think the team is still good enough to be a regular season champions. The Tampa Bay Lightning, I really like obviously everyone's all mad at them for the emotional send up or the lack of emotion they showed. And I think they're just biting the bullet. They went out and got Gensel. They're bringing back pieces that make sense for now, not just based on sentimentality, but hey, we still want to win hockey games. We still want to win cups. Thank you. I don't want to say I don't care what you've done for us, but what have you done for me lately and what's best for our future, right? I'm the GM. I'm the president of hockey ops. I got to be here for 20 years. You only are here for 5 to 6, 7, 8, right? Obviously, Stamkos is longer, but I think that's going to take a lot of guts, and I think they're going to get rewarded for it. The Bruins, I think there's something in the fabric of that team. This is not the year to sleep on the Bruins, I think. I think their demise is coming. I don't think it's here yet. The Panthers, still too talented of a team for me to really count them out. Maybe they're not a division winner, but they definitely have a chance to get a divisional spot or wild card. We've seen that before. And the Sabres, obviously, I can't talk all off season and for the last 2 weeks about how much better the Sabres are going to be and how I just have to throw them in there. We talked about the Rangers and Hurricanes. There's nothing really much to mention there. And my wild card, probably the worst team in the playoffs, hot take there, lowest amount of points, I should say, for all the playoff teams, is probably the Washington Capitals in that 3rd spot in the Metropolitan. I look at the New York Islanders. I think they got worse last season with the coaching change. I don't think they did much to remedy that. I don't think this team is really constructed all that well. There's not much I like about the New York Islanders. Pittsburgh Penguins, I just kind of aired my feelings about them with I don't really like the roster. I think it's still got great players. Is it going to be enough to get 94 points? Maybe, maybe not. I think there's a lot of question marks there. So I look at a team like the Washington Capitals. I think they surprised a lot of people last year. Everyone said they were tanking, and they put up 91 points and made the playoffs. Now, was it a little fluky? Were they analytically great? Not necessarily, but they definitely played well. I think they had poor puck luck, poor shooting luck too. And they made some really savvy acquisitions besides the PLD acquisition this offseason. And, I'm just looking at their blue line. You take a look at a guy like Matt Waugh, not sure. Rasmus Sandin, I know they didn't acquire him this offseason, but, Ethan Bear is a good player. Obviously, still got John Carlson, Jacob Chikrin, who they also acquired this season. I think, he was kind of valued too highly coming out of Arizona, going to Ottawa. I think we figured out what he is, and I think he's getting paid appropriately and is going to play an appropriate role. And then I just look at the roster. I mean, Mangiapane, great pickup there. Like Dylan Strome still playing really, really well. Connor McMichael really starting to establish himself in the NHL. So I think this is a team that is doing one last up and up before it's the end of the Ovi era. And I think they're good enough. I absolutely think they're good enough to get the third spot in the Metro, because the Metro is one of the least impressive divisions in all of hockey. Now, the New Jersey Devils are a team that I potentially am overlooking here, but I'm going to stick to my guns and say Washington Capitals.
Okay, fair enough. Again, like you said, I think Washington's the team I'd most disagree with here. The one thing I will agree with you is they have an excellent defensive core, 1 through 7. Those are very, very good defensemen, and it's very steady. You have lost one of your goalies, but Charlie Lindgren was good last year, and Logan Thompson. And one of the two will find form, I'm sure, and become the starter. Where I don't have the same confidence as you is with the forward core. Obviously, you've lost Nick Backstrom. You have Oshie on IR right now. You don't know how good Ovechkin is going to be this year, and he's always been their main offensive motor. And I have absolutely zero belief in the aforementioned Pierre-Luc Dubois. So in terms of positive pieces, I agree Mangiapane is a great addition. I think Dylan Strome will play well. Perhaps Connor McMichael will get some, and Protest will get some uh, additions to their game. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word progression there. But I don't think it's going to be enough. I think the regression of players like Ovechkin, I think Carlson's starting to get up there in age as well, and the uncertainty, as much as one of them may do well, they're both kind of, none of them are known as elite goaltenders. I don't have the confidence in this forward core to score enough goals to get them into the playoffs.
I love it. It's the end of Ovi and it's Crosby's career, and we're still debating whose team is going to do better. That's literally what it came down to, is you and I debating Washington versus Pittsburgh. Oh my goodness.
Oh man, what a rivalry.
I think one thing we can both agree on, though, is neither of those teams are going to win the cup.
God, no.
Who do you have coming out of the East for your cup matchup?
Well, now. I'm gonna say they finally bucked the trend. You know what? It reminds me a lot of Tampa Bay, where they go far quite a bit, but they would never quite hit the finals. Until they had that streak where they hit the finals. Florida's another team where they go deep in the playoffs plenty of times, but they never quite hit the finals. I think one team that's been following that trend, and I think will do it this year, contrary to me conjuring up a reason not to have them as the division winner, I think Carolina is going to come out of the East.
I love that, because I also have Carolina coming out of the East.
Oh!
I just look at it and it's like, it's not going to be the Rangers, because it's just not going to be the Rangers. And I just look at the depth. Like, I love the addition of Jack Roslovic to this Carolina Hurricanes roster. William Carrier, I think, is a great addition.
Underrated.
Right? There's these little things. We already knew that they've got that top end talent and they've got the system. But I think those are the kind of things that are going to push them over the edge. Another year of experience for Kochetkov, maybe Frederik Andersen. One of them is going to find their form, as you mentioned earlier, and I think that's good enough. You just need one hot goalie come playoff time. I just think the Hurricanes, from top to bottom, I mean, I really like the Sean Walker acquisition. Brent Burns is still there. Slavin, Orlov, Gostisbehere. I mean, even Chatfield is good. So, like,
Canucks legend
Riley Stillman is there as well, by the way. So.
Oh, God, never mind. I take it back. Tank Commander. God, they're not making the playoffs. My bad.
He was decent for us. Anyway, I just look at this Carolina Hurricanes roster, and I think they do have enough elite talent with Svechnikov being healthy, Aho, Seth Jarvis really coming to his own. Neckish, they just signed. Yeah. They took the shot on Kotkaniemi, right? We'll see how that one keeps going. But honestly, I think the whole team, I think they've got enough to get out of this crowded Eastern Conference. Well, really, honestly, I say crowded. If they can get past the Rangers, they don't.
Yeah. It's going to be a Cinderella team that's their biggest threat, I think. I think, obviously, we mentioned the Rangers, and they're always the threat in the East. You know what? The back of my mind I was thinking about the Sabres there. But whether it's the Sabres, whether it's the Islanders, whether it's the Devils, whatever team, Detroit, I don't think it's going to be Florida or Toronto or New York that's their biggest threat. I think it will be someone we haven't thought about right now.
And I think obviously we do these with prediction episodes and we jot these all down and get our takes out there, but honestly nobody knows.
Yeah.
But you
Mhm.
know who knows about the Western
Who?
Conference is you.
Oh, I do know about the Western Conference. That's
So
right.
so who
My
are
team's in
your
the West.
playoff teams from the Western Conference? We know your two top teams
Yeah.
from the Pacific and Central, but who is going to be there? Who's at the dance on the Western Conference?
All right. From the Pacific Division, we have the Edmonton Oilers, we have the Vegas Golden Knights, and we have the Vancouver Canucks. Gonna fit it in frame. As much as again, cautious optimism, emphasis on the optimism. I'm not expecting us to like go freaking tank for whoever's going Michael Misa or whatever, right? But the rest of the picks before I go into analysis. From the Central, I have of course the Nashville Predators. I have the Colorado Avalanche. I have the Dallas Stars. I have the Winnipeg Jets. And as my second wildcard team, I have the Utah. I'm not going to call them the hockey club. We're going to call them what they all know they should be called, whether you're a Johnny Superman fan or just listening to the spoilers, the Utah Yeti.
I like that. I think I don't really have anything to complain about your list. I know I had some stuff to complain about with the Eastern Conference, but we don't have the same list. We've got largely the same list because we see things, pretty typically, and most hockey fans I think would agree with our list of playoff teams. But I really like the shout for Utah there. I know their stint in Utah got off to a rocky start when they scored on themselves, but they were a team that was playing really good hockey in a college arena. They're now playing in front of a fan base that's going to be excited to see them. We've seen expansion teams get that boost from the city, right? Seattle did great. Not right away, but Vegas did great right away. Then we saw Seattle get there, right? We see these cities rally around these new teams, and they get a little bit of a performance boost. And I think Arizona has some talent. Now you're banking on their young players taking that step, becoming what we think they can become. But I don't think it's that crazy of a shout to say the Utah Hockey Club makes the playoffs this year.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think looking at their roster, they have two good goalies in Karel Vizmelka and Connor Ingram. I think both those guys can get it done, and they've shown they can get it done throughout the season. I think they really shored up their decor. You look at the Sergachev acquisition. You look at on their decor, Dursey, Marino, Kesselring to a lesser extent. But you look at those three guys there; those are very good top four defensemen. Then you have people like Ian Cole, Valimaki, Kesselring, who can all fill in the number 4 and beyond defensemen. And you look at a lot of the ages, outside of Ian Cole, these are very young defensive core. Like you said, great opportunity for growth. And up front, again, lots of young forwards. You have the established forwards like Clayton Keller and Nick Schmaltz, but you also have young players like Barrett Hayton, Michelli, Josh Doan, Logan Cooley, Dylan Gunther. Just a absolute bevy of young riches there. So maybe the idea is that this is not their breakout year. Maybe it's next year. But I think with just so much opportunity and so much it's hard to leave Utah out of this list. And just talking with the other teams selected, if we look at the rest of the Central, I believe all of them made the playoffs last year. Nashville had a very competitive series against Vancouver. Talked a little bit about them. Won't say anything more. The Jets, I think, with Hellbeck and just how solid they are offensively, almost an underrated defense as well with that Winnipeg team. I think they're going to make it. You look at Dallas and the Avs, they just have such huge stars, for the Avs. Rantanen, McKinnon, Makar, this just, you can't see them missing. And same thing with the Stars, Jason Robertson, Rupe Hintz,
Even Wyatt
Miro
Johnston.
Heiskanen, Jake Ottinger, Wyatt Johnston. It's just, they have so many people you can't even think of. I feel like I'm still missing someone. Sorry?
Logan Stankoven?
Logan Stankoven. Hold on. Let me see. There's someone I'm missing here. That's why I said Robertson, Hintz, Dane, Wyatt Johnston. Yeah. So, and Thomas Harley as well. They just signed him for a couple years. They have so many great players who are in their prime or young. It's just, and they've got great veterans like Ben and Sagan. I know they aren't what they used to be, but they're still great vets to have, in that middle six area. Mason Marchment, of course, Evgeny Dadonov, they've got great depth options. So with these teams, it's just I just can't see them missing. So for the Central and then for the Pacific has to have 3 spots, and I think they'll earn their spots. But I think the rest of the Pacific teams just are not ready to step up and challenge the Canucks, Golden Knights, and Oilers for those 3 spots.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I think it's very top heavy when you get to the Pacific, right? You know the 3 teams. We talk like the 3 teams. I don't even have to tell you because you know that those are my 3 teams from the Pacific: the Canucks, the Oilers, and the Golden Knights, right? Those are the 3 best teams, head and shoulders above the rest of the division. And then you go back to the Western Conference, same thing as last year, right? The Stars, the Jets, the Avalanche, and the Predators, right? Now, are we going to shuffle them? Sure, right? You've got Nashville winning it, and I think Winnipeg takes a step back and is not a division spot, right? Maybe a wild card spot, but I also have those 4. I think then you get to that disgusting pea soup of just teams that you don't love picking
Just
any
mid.
of them. Just mid. I guess that's the mantra of this episode.
Mid. That's a great title.
You look at St. Louis, Minnesota, Arizona. Chicago's probably not going to take that step. Then you've got the Kings, the Flames, the Kraken, and then we've got the Ducks and the Sharks. Right, they're probably closer to Chicago than the rest of the teams. But I'm like, you've got that middle group of teams that you could pretty much make a case for any of them, and I'd hear you out. So I'm going to make a case for the LA Kings. I think the LA Kings had a lot of I don't want to say turmoil and make it a bigger deal than it is, but I don't think things were right off the ice. I think getting Pierre-Luc Dubois off the roster
absolutely.
I think it's a net positive for maybe just the locker room. I think on the ice he's still got enough talent, not enough to be an $8 million player, but I look at this roster. Drew Doughty being out is gonna hurt, but I love Brant Clark. I think Gavrikov is really good. Mikey Anderson, Joel Edmondson is a good defender, right? So I like their blue line. Their goaltenders of Kemper, Rittich, and Copley. Somebody has to figure it out. And then obviously their forward core. They still got Kopitar, but they've also got Byfield, who's 22 and getting better. Philippe Deneau is one of the best matchup centers in the NHL. You've got Kempe, Moore. I love Warren Fogle for this roster. Add some more size, physicality, and speed to this roster. Tanner Jeannot, Lafreniere. Am I saying that correctly?
Laferriere, I think.
Laferriere, thank you. I like Alex Turcotte. Like, there's a lot of things to like, and there's a good blend. I really like this roster's blend of veteran, been there, done that, in ascending youth talent. The goaltending is clearly the biggest question mark with this roster, but I think if that's where they get an edge over Utah, is the fact that they've been there, they've done that, they're battle tested, yet they're not so aging like the Penguins that you're like, can they skate hard for 82 games? You've got youth that's coming up that's going to bolster these guys that have been there and done that, like Kopitar, and they're going to get Drew Doughty back at some point this season. I think that's got kind of perfect trade deadline acquisition to slot right in your lineup.
Yeah, speaking of, I think that's my biggest concern with LA is how will they do for this first bit without Drew Doughty? I still think they're a decent team, perhaps maybe even a little better than Utah, but I wonder if they drop too many points early in October and November while they don't have Doughty, that they can then no longer catch up and end up making that second wild card. I think when it comes to the Kings as well, again, definitely could see them making it, but you look at those goalies, and I think, I'm sure you're right, one of them will catch fire, but how long will it take for one of them to catch fire? How many games will they lose with two of the goalies are not on their stride? How long will it take for one of them to catch fire? How many games will they lose? I don't think the Kings, I think, are more dangerous if they make the playoffs. I think they're a threat to really upset a 1 seed and maybe even the team after that before getting dispatched in the third round. They're a scary team to face in terms of, as you mentioned, a very, very solid defensive core and still a fairly young defensive core outside of Drew Doughty. Shout out Canucks legend Kyle Burrows. I think he's a great 7th defenseman, and he always brings intensity and hits. and he's just a good locker room guy as well. You look at their forward core, and it's like you said, it's just a very big mix. You have some very young guys, you got the middle age, and then you have some older vets like the older vet, I should say, in Kopitar. Dano, again, his defensive matchup, I think that's more of a threat in the playoffs than the regular season as well. That's where if they are the 8th seed, all of a sudden as a 1 seed, I'm getting a little scared looking at this. And I think this will, someone like Byfield, I agree. This is, he's a good young player who I think will have a good breakout season this year. And if he does, that will be a big contributing factor for the reason why they make it. But I could also see him just having a good season, or even having said breakout season, but the other areas on the team, including the other forwards, not producing enough, or the goaltenders not getting it together, being a reason for why they don't make the playoffs.
And I think, it goes back to it's more of a toss up for me between them and Utah. Trailing there a little bit is Minnesota, right? I think they've got some really young players that are getting better, but sticking with Utah and the LA Kings, I know I picked the same playoff grouping. Obviously, I don't think it's going to be the same seeding, but I picked the same 8 playoff teams year over year. I don't know how often that happens. I don't have the stats for that, but nobody outside of this 8 has shown me enough or has made enough moves to where I'm comfortable saying, okay, this team regressed enough for me to take them out. I think it'll be close. I think it can come down to the wire, but we're talking about a 99-point team versus a 77-point team. Is there 22 points to split the two? And really, there was 7 points between Nashville or I should say the Vegas Golden Knights, but I think they're better than a 98-point team. But there was 6-7 points between the wild card and the next best playoff team. And then after that, you had a 5-point drop off before you got to a 6-point. Like, it just really drops off really fast. So I love projecting the upside, but it's one of those, I haven't seen enough to say, 11, 15 points for some of these Western Conference teams is going to be shaved off one way or another to which they vault in. But I think, if things go right, Utah is absolutely that's probably the team I would pick. I mean, obviously Minnesota and St. Louis have been there in that bucket of mediocrity for the last few years, but the new city boost, I think, can help out Utah for sure. So now that we have our 8, who's going to triumph over them and face you had Carolina. Yeah, we both have Carolina.
Yeah.
Who's going to face the Hurricanes in the finals, Abby?
Are you ready for the hopium?
Yes. Lay it on me.
Because I am not. I'm going to pick the Dallas Stars.
Oof. Oh my God.
Cautiously optimistic.
I was so ready for it. I was like, all right, he's finally going to give me that rah-rah speech about the Canucks that I've been waiting for this whole episode. But no, you have chosen the Dallas Stars, which I think is a good pick, right? You just look at their roster top to bottom. You broke it down. I guess I should have seen some foreshadowing there, but it is one good roster.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's the same theme as the Carolina Hurricanes, as the former Lightning, as the former Panthers, where you're making the playoffs over and over again. You're making deep runs, but you're not quite there. These are the teams that go on to win the cup. So I think this is their year to break out. The Avalanche have already won. I think the Canucks need one more good year. If they can prove they can get to that 3rd round, maybe give Dallas some hell in that last round there, I think then maybe the Canucks are next in line. But I think Dallas has been too consistent. They have too many stars. They're too young. They're too talented with a good goalie, good decor, and they can score. And I think my final this year is the Dallas Stars against the Carolina Hurricanes.
I would love to see that. I think that's one of those where it's hard for me to root against either of those teams. I think it'd be fun, and I think the Dallas Stars have too many stars. You heard it here first. They're just there. I mean, they are stupid deep, but I am not going to go with them. I refuse to, despite the Dallas Stars having former Buffalo Sabre Ilya Labushkin. Do they have any other Buffalo Sabres? And the answer, I believe, is no. And that, I mean, it's just going to be trumped. The Buffalo Sabre, a former Buffalo Sabre must win the cup to just pile on our suffering. It is just how it should be. And that means I'm picking Colorado to go and face
Whoa.
Carolina. I think it's two teams built in very different manners, and I think it would be one electric matchup to see the depth and the waves of great but not elite talent from Carolina go up against the stars of the Avalanche, right? The McKinnons, the Makars, the Rantanens, and Middlestat, right? How is that all going to go? And we'll see the goaltending tested, but I think, these two teams, I think, would be a fun show. Obviously, Casey Middlestat gets to play there, so that's the prominent Sabre that could win the cup.
I see. No, that's a good take. Again, I think the Avalanche are always a threat to win it, just because, again, McKinnon, Makar, and it's just a matter of if the depth around them holds up. And again, very well could, as long as they're healthy. They do have a good supporting cast in terms of on defense players like Devon Taves, and other forwards as well. Hold on, sorry, I'm just gonna pull up their thing, so I'm not just talking. But yeah, Devon Taves, we talked about earlier, Shillington, Josh Manson, all these guys, they have great depth on that decor. And then they have forwards like Lehkonen and Druin and Ross Colton and all these guys who can contribute offensively, but I definitely would give the edge to Carolina's depth. Like you said, can Colorado's heavy top six take it to the more balanced Carolina team? That's definitely an interesting matchup. I think that would even be a better matchup than the Hurricane Stars.
All right, and now I need you to tell me who's going to win your matchup.
I was going to ask you, but you beat me to the punch.
I did.
I did. You know what? Like you said, Dallas is a lot of stars, and I think those stars are going to lift the cup. So I think Dallas will win the series, and I think it'll be 6 games. And trust me, as someone whose team was in a division with Dallas, I will be cheering very hard for the Carolina Hurricanes if this is the final, but I think ultimately they just have everything you need to win the cup, and I think they will.
I think I'd have to agree with you in that head-to-head matchup. Stars, Hurricanes, I think I'm leaning Stars. Avalanche, Hurricanes, I'm leaning the Hurricanes. I think the Carolina Hurricanes get it done. I think they've got the better goaltending situation. I think they have more depth. I think they need less to go their way in that head-to-head matchup. Not to mention, they have a stupid amount of former Sabres. Sure, the Colorado Avalanche have Casey Middlestat, but can I interest you in one William Carrier? How about Eric Robinson? What about Brendan Lemieux, a former draft pick? Tyson Jost is here as well, not to mention Riley Stillman. That's 5 former Sabres. That's what you need to win. We saw the Florida Panthers do it last year with Kulikov, Montour, Reinhart. I know I'm forgetting more, but there was Kyle Oposo was there, right? To win the cup, you have to load up on former Sabres. The Carolina Hurricanes have done that job this season. I think they're going to knock off the Colorado Avalanche in 7, because I like entertainment. So 7 games.
I agree with your assessment. I apologize. I thought you were swerving me for a second, like you were debating me towards one way, but you did actually pick what I expected you to pick. So my apologies. I started laughing like I misheard you, so my apologies. But I agree. 7 games. I think it'd be a very tough series as well. But I think I just think it would be something as well where you get the goaltending tested as well, right? Is Carolina's goaltending healthy as well at that point? If it is healthy, does it stay healthy throughout the series? If either side, I think if Colorado loses a goalie, there's a less of a impact, because as much as I understand Georgiev is better than Justus Annunen or whoever they could acquire as a backup goalie throughout the season, I think goaltending will be the biggest X factor in this series. As much as it's a battle of top heaviness versus depth, I think goaltending will decide who wins that series.
I think both series are going to be fun. I think the season is going to be fun. Let's hope that you and I are in a positive mood every week. And let's hope you, the listeners, are also in a positive mood every week, because we sprinkle a little bit of hockey knowledge on your week and your day. But guys, thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it. Make sure to follow wherever you get your podcast. Take us on the go. Or if you're sitting down and you want to see our faces, we're on YouTube too. So go ahead and check us out. Rybread SN is the YouTube channel. We are the Expansion Bros. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will talk to you in the next one.
Peace.